Well, hi, Shrikant, and also Maritza and Joe. I'm gonna forward this video um, to all of you. I think with Maritza and Joe, I'm just gonna share it in the WhatsApp. But Shrikant isn't there, so I'm gonna send it to him via mail. But I've just finished your session on Bucky, kind of that comprehensive session, and I love the notion of having had 3 quarters of the year, taking the fourth quarter to integrate, perhaps kintegrate. That's what I'm doing, and I'm, going along the ephemeralizing and, generally speaking, practicing Wu Wei insofar as not having to, no need for effort, no need for effort. Because these things go together as they like, as they please, and it is my pleasure to figure out ways in which they might, and in which they may, and in which they may become very useful, like this box that can house all of my instruments at once. And that's really what I'm doing with these things, not just playing and dancing, which in its own right is fine, absolutely. How would we call in the design science studio with Stephanie Schwartz and the Fuller feedback systems, we're preparing or we're offering a extracurricular activity direction, and I think all of this has to do with that, is to figure out how the shapes can find their place in our lives, and I think Shrikant, you always quote this notion of form follows function. And whenever I hear that, I think, every finger points 2 ways. And really, I'm not so sure that form only follows function. I think it's also a reciprocal compendance, and those two things co-arise, because without the form, the function couldn't be, right? And very often I need to create the form, on the basis of knowing comprehensively that there is a spectrum of shapes, a spectrum of forms to choose from, and that spectrum is ever expanding the more complex we take these things. But just as it is, the spectrum offers us a whole range of places to begin with, a whole range. And it's a very different world that comes from that than the one where the only form, no matter the function, is only boxes. And you can see we can integrate those, yes, but they are cumbersome and awkward. They don't know how to be sphere. They've been made to forget. And this is the same kind of beats on a string as these are, or these, or those, those on the table. And I got a whole bag full of these back over in my room. And I don't know, the format of, there's more, the format of the sessions of the living ideas, because of the medium in which it happens, which of course is the virtual, because of that, it's not so easy to communicate the experience of these shapes. And I think what we've been doing so far with weaving, I mean, we could of course also explore a couple of different techniques to create other structures. Like, this is the thing I do for the tree ships too, where it's just a string running around the branch. No need to drill holes or anything, and one can work off the whole spindle, and does not need to cut off the line beforehand, but can just see how long the line needs be. Sorry, I'm trying to... no effort, but these things were just holding one another in place, and the metal rods are somewhat they have little friction. Anyways, it's gonna settle somewhere. So yeah, I think we could look into something like that, look into pattern integrities through those pair of eyes, those couple of eyes. But I would dearly love to have a lot more of these sessions of retrospective, of feedback, of people going through the things that were being said, and the experiences they had, and the things that they experienced outside of the meetings where they were already integrating. And I'd love to also, if that was possible, at some point have a meetup with a couple of these Maori friends of Yoshimi and John, because I've seen a podcast once where one of the Aotearoa Maori was speaking about essentially spherical thinking and box thinking, and I would just love to hear what these people think and feel about these things, especially given the huge place that they have within the worldview and perspective of Bucky. I don't know if you're very familiar with Bucky's ideas of history, or ponderings of history, but the sea people, the Maori, and their ancestors play a most significant role within that. It's just, the whole thing is so interesting, and this is also spoken to in Tetrascroll, in Goldilocks and the Three Bears, the child's book that Bucky created for his daughter Allegra. And I think it is wise to give lend an ear and a couple of eyes specifically with that, perhaps just to begin with. Look at the lithographs that Bucky created for that book and that story, and look at the stories they tell, because they tell so much on their own. And I feel like the Tetrascroll is a great little book. It is not the easiest either, but none of Bucky's books are. But it's worthwhile. Just consider ourselves to be kids again, and then as such, as children, we look through a fresh pair of eyes and take these stories to heart. And I think in the beginning of Tetrascroll, Bucky says to the readers, so this is a book for little ones, for young ones, but there's gonna be a lot of words in it that you don't know. So look for a book called a dictionary and see if you find the words in there to begin to understand and comprehend. Sort of like that, I'm paraphrasing. So that's, I think, a beautiful place. And another book that always comes to mind, I mean, Patravasio would be great to also meet again, and I think someone I would absolutely love to get to know through one of your meetups would be Amy Edmondson, who wrote a fuller explanation, which I think is should not just be a print on demand, but should be something everyone in the world gets a chance to at least take a look at and decide for themselves whether what it says has any relevance to their life or not. And I think it's a brilliant introduction and overview and integration and storyline of synergetics. And I think Amy Edmondson is a super fascinating person too. I mean, I've only seen her, I think, in a video. I recently saw a film that was recorded in Bucky's offices after his passing, and like 2 weeks after or so, and it was with his daughter Allegra and Jamie, his grandson, and I think the filmmaker was his nephew or something. And they go through the whole place and look at everything, look at his room where he had a collection of examples of ethnosynergetics, so to speak, and they look into the chronophile archives, and a couple of people speak about these things and about the pictures on the wall and whatever. And then Amy Edmondson is shown talking to a group of people in the entrance and also speaking about some of her work. And I think what she did with fuller explanation is absolutely incredible and invaluable in communicating kind of in a voice that speaks both languages, you know. It bridges perhaps better than anything else the vast gap between the conventional frame of mind and the synergetic one. So that's a strong recommendation, I think. Really, that one would be worth it. And another book that always comes to mind, and this is why I've been saying it comes to mind and then went off into another one that comes to mind, but this one, I don't know, it's been a while since I read it, but I remember that I found it to be a very concise and comprehensive book of Bucky's, specifically in the way it also goes into synergetics along the way. And that book is called Cosmography, and it's his last book. It actually was published post-mortem, and I think it may have been finished by someone who knew him well, something like that. But that's also true of my favorite book of Alan Watts, which I'd love to look into with your group. You know, the Tao, the Way of Water, I think is the name of it. It's a brilliant book. Brilliant. And it would be so great to do with your group, because there's actual people who can speak the calligraphies in there, speak the actual words that are otherwise only depicted. Yeah, that would be fantastic. So those are some thoughts I had. Of course, there's other books on Bucky and stuff, but I think if I can be so naive to offer this as another idea. In a way, Shrikant, I think you are sort of right and wrong, or mistaken and not mistaken, when you say that synergetics is too much or too thick or too whatever. Oh, by the way, looking at Applewhite, Cosmic Fishing would be brilliant also as a book to read. It's Applewhite's book about writing synergetics, and it's got the most fabulous back and forth chatter in the side notes and the footnotes by Bucky and EJ. So that's absolutely brilliant too. But back to synergetics, I think it is not to be understood necessarily the way that I read it first, which was not the actual physical one, but the one on the web. I read it, beginning in the beginning and just went through, because that's how I usually read books. Took a while, but it was worthwhile, most definitely, life-changing. But I think what it really is it's like the saga books in Iceland, the ancient, the Old Norse literature, which is these collections of spoken word, spoken thought, spoken story. And all of those sagas create a vast cosmos, like a storyverse. And they all relate to one another, and one can jump in here and go there, or, whatever which way. There's lots of ways to go in there. All are equally worthwhile taking. And if mistaken, it's no big deal to go back. But in these story verses, these cosmic oral traditions, these are also episodes. They are basically like a collection of stories. It's like an ocean of thought, and wherever and whichever place in the ocean we jumped into this and just picked up a couple of paragraphs and looked at them in detail, it would be rich and deep enough to do, and not even do much, no need to go through a whole chapter of this at once. It may be enough to go through one paragraph, or 3 or 4 or so. And as I'm trying to read my way into the actual physical copy, which I find is a very different approach, because it's the web version is an integration of Synergetics 1 and 2. But I love the way this goes into the story. The beginning of it is really great. Look, this is 108. That's 9 dozen. 4 triangles out of 2. 1 plus 1 is 4. It's right there, just in the beginning. And there's an introduction and a part about universe that I find super fascinating. And the way that I live with Synergetics, the books, or the words, is basically that if I have any question coming up from someone or from my own thinking, I can go through the index, which is available on the web, and look into references to these concepts that I want to know, and then just look up that bit, and I end up reading a whole chapter because of that. But it's, I think somewhere in it there's a note by Bucky saying on something like on the reason for repetition or something, because it is very repetitive, but it's not because that's a bad thing, because that's the way that we learn by heart. It's the way that we can learn orally. And if you like to take a look, Daniel Ari Friedman, who had one session with you all, has been doing synergetics live streams for a while, where he would just go into detail and read a number of sections, paragraphs, and read them, and then go through them once more, kind of translating them in his own words. And I do think that's a brilliant way to do this too. And I could see a lot of ways in which we could have this become like a, well, the cornerstone. The stone that the builders refused will always be the head cornerstone. And synergetics may just be a place where we can weave together the whole community and invite people to go tell us their stories they had with this, or tell us which are their favorite sections, and then we can go through those together. Lots of things, And also, this may be the last suggestion in this little train of thoughts, is the very first episode of BBC Horizons, which is now an ancient, it's been going on for years, this BBC productions on science stuff, and the very first episode was The World of Buckminster Fuller. It's one of the movies about him, and I think it's an outstanding one, as they all are, but that one is really good. And I think that would also be fascinating and interesting to see a perspective from his lifetime, when he was, very well recognized as a person of interest to lots of people, and he was a voice being listened to, if not understood. And I think it's a fascinating perspective to go into and see how he was understood or not, and what he was saying in that, what he was showing in that. Like the very first scene shows him standing in front of a sphere, a geodesic sphere, perhaps the one in, I don't know, anyone, perhaps a ray dome or something, but he's holding in his hand the very model of that construct of the cube with the 4 eyes in it. And I would think that might have been the first thing he showed these people, but it takes a while until they actually show his bit of storytelling on that down the road in the movie. But it's a beautiful scene. I've put it on my YouTube channel. It's a little extract. Alright, that's enough. 24 minutes of me giving a feedback to your brilliant conversation. I really truly enjoyed every minute of it, and I'm so grateful for this whole cosmic web we're weaving among us. A cosmic web of comprehension. So, namaste, I suppose. Take care, Ashe, and peace. Peace for all. That should be about